So when the EU rolled out its huge privacy law, GDPR, the idea was pretty simple. Give us back control of our data. But what if, in building that digital fortress, it also accidentally created a major roadblock for the economy and for the entire future of technology? Let's unpack the really complex story of the world's most powerful privacy law. And let's be clear, GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, became a huge deal almost overnight. It was the new gold standard for data privacy. Its influence was so massive that experts started calling it the Brussels effect. Basically, global companies and even entire countries started copying its rules just so they could do business in the massive European market. But here's the twist. Underneath that success story, a totally different picture started to form, one with surprising economic costs and a fundamental clash with the next great tech revolution, artificial intelligence. Okay, so to really get this conflict, we've got to rewind a bit and look at what GDPR was trying to do in the first place. You can think of it as a digital fortress built to defend our rights in an age of big data. Basically, GDPR had two big goals. First, to create one single unified set of privacy rules for the entire EU. And second, and this was the big one, to give people, you and me, real meaningful control over our personal information. In a world where our data was being collected with almost no rules, this was pretty revolutionary. This is where that Brussels effect comes in. Author Anu Bradford came up with a term to describe how EU rules basically become the world's rules. I mean, think about it. The EU market is massive. So if you're a global company, is it easier to make two different products or just make one that follows the strictest rules? You just follow the EU rules everywhere. And that's exactly what happened with GDPR. And GDPR isn't some old law gathering dust. It's a living, breathing thing. It was adopted back in 2016 and really kicked into gear in 2018, but it's always evolving. The EU is already cooking up new rules for 2026 to make enforcement even tougher. It's a project that's constantly being updated. All right, so the EU is busy building up this digital fortress, but at the same time, some researchers started noticing, well, some pretty unexpected cracks in the economic foundation. So you have to wonder, right? After the law was in full swing, what was the real-world impact on business? Specifically, how did it affect the flow of digital services, which are basically the lifeblood of the modern economy? Well, a big study from the think tank EasyPay dropped a bombshell. It found that the EU's imports of data-heavy services from countries with different data rules, they dropped by over 8%. That is a huge hit. And get this, it wasn't just a one-way street. The EU's own exports of those same services also took a nosedive, falling by over 4%. So the very rule designed to protect Europeans was actually making it harder for European companies to do business around the world. So what in the world was going on? Was privacy itself bad for business? The study was really clear on this. Nope. The problem wasn't the idea of privacy. The problem was the incredibly complicated and clunky rules for moving data outside the EU. It created all this legal confusion and high costs, especially if you were sending data somewhere with a different legal system. Yeah, that traffic jam analogy, it's perfect. Imagine trying to move data. Companies had to wrestle with these super rigid legal contracts called standard contractual clauses, and then do these massive risk reports. It just created this mountain of paperwork and legal headaches, slowing everything down and making it more expensive for everybody. Okay, so that economic speed bump was one thing, but a much, much deeper problem was brewing. A real philosophical clash between what GDPR stands for and what the future of tech, artificial intelligence, actually needs to survive. And this is where you see the fundamental problem. GDPR is all about something called data minimization. The idea is you should only collect the absolute bare minimum of data you need for one specific thing. But AI, especially machine learning, it works on the complete opposite principle. It thrives on big data. It needs giant, messy data sets to learn anything at all. And this is a great way to see why. Think about a neural network. It learns by chewing through massive amounts of stuff, like millions of pictures. It starts by seeing simple things, like edges, then maybe parts of a face, and eventually it can recognize a whole face. But without that giant library of images to learn from, it's useless. For AI, data isn't just helpful, it's the actual fuel in the tank. A European Parliament report put it perfectly. They said AI has become hungry for data, and this hunger has spurred data collection in a self-reinforcing spiral. I mean, that's a direct collision with GDPR's less is more philosophy. So, what do you do when your landmark law is causing economic friction and is fundamentally at odds with the next big thing in tech? Well, if you're the EU, you double down. You do what you do best. You start writing an even bigger rulebook. And that brings us to the EU AI Act. This is the EU's incredibly ambitious plan to write the world's first ever comprehensive law for artificial intelligence. But here's the really interesting part. They're not starting from scratch. They're trying to fix the problems from GDPR by building right on top of its core ideas. And you can totally see the family resemblance here. Big ideas from GDPR, like making companies responsible for their systems, making sure things are fair and transparent, they're all getting copied and pasted right into the AI Act. The EU is pretty much saying, hey, those values we set for data, they're going to be the values for AI too. So when you step back, you can see this really clear three-step strategy. First, the EU used GDPR to plant its flag and set the global standard for digital rights. Second, it watched and analyzed the real-world impact, the good and the bad. And now, step 3, it's taking all those lessons and applying them to write the rules for the next frontier, AI. And that leads us to the billion-dollar question, doesn't it? The whole GDPR story shows us that even the best-intentioned rules can have these huge, unexpected side effects. So as the EU steps up to write the rulebook for AI, it's walking this incredibly fine line. Can it create a world where AI is safe, ethical, and fair without accidentally crushing the very innovation it needs to compete on the world stage? That right there is the great unanswered question.